Robi. Right, and welcome back to the conversation with the Cabinet Secretary for the National Treasury. Let's start right there, because there has been questions raised about the cost of printing money, but also the Central Bank of Kenya governor is talking about it was necessitated by stockouts. What have you been able to appraise yourself about? Because those are things that should be foreseen before there's such a glaring chance of stockout.
No, some have not had opportunity to engage with CBK. It's one of the parastatals under my ministry. Actually, I'd planned to have a meeting with the 5 financial state-owned enterprises under my ministry. Then I have a number, so I've tried to stagger the engagement. I started with KRA.
Right.
And I was also engaging with the Insurance Regulatory Authority. I intend to have engagement. In fact, the governor had invited me for a function and a meeting, subsequently a meeting.
Right.
But I was engaged in other assignments, so I postponed that. So after next week, because a bit having quite a lot of engagement this week and next week, then I'll move to CBK and get to engage, understand the processes and the procedures and things that they have done of late, and even going forward, how do we tackle issues of monetary policies. So this matter, I've been reading about it. I know Parliament is on it, which I think is a good thing, because Parliament has an oversighting role to play in this. So I will get more facts, more details, how they did the procurement, the budget, how much expenditure later. As of now, I don't have much information about the whole process.
Let's engage on something that you might know, because you've been at Parliament for quite some time. And if you have to look at the Public Procurements and Disposal Act, it talks about classified procurement, which can be followed if the procuring entity has given a list to the National Treasury Cabinet Secretary of things that they think are going to be procured through classified means, but there is no schedule saying what can be classified. Are you satisfied with the setup of the law as it is, and what would be your opinion?
You know, sometimes the law gives the skeleton, the architecture. You know, we have the Constitution. Constitution usually gives the frame. Then the statutes give the architecture. But then now details sometimes come in regulations. So if
I've looked at the regulations.
If there are no regulations, then I think there could be some gaps. And that is why legislation is a continuous process. If you discover there are gaps, then the best thing to do is to bring a legislation to cure those gaps. So if we will discover that some of these problems are caused by gaps in our legal framework, then we bring amendments to the legal framework, or we bring those provisions in the law, which then would make it difficult for anyone to abuse these processes.
Do you know previously how money was being procured through De La Rue? What was the process like?
Actually, there were questions around De La Rue. I may not get to the details about it, unless now I go back and check.
Right.
But there were questions about how were we procuring De La Rue as a money printing firm for us. A lot of it was it was always the excuse that money is a very sensitive, printing of money is a very sensitive process and exercise that you can't give it just to anybody else. But again, it was discovered that no, that is an excuse. Another thing was that we had a contract with De La Rue, which was running for years. I think that again lapsed. So, but you can't remove or eliminate the possibility that there could be collusions here and there. And I think there was a whole investigation around De La Rue and a lot of recommendations. I don't know how far they went.
Okay.
I don't know whether that is the same case obtaining today. That's why I will tell you, as the CS who is concerned, of the relevant ministry, and you can see a lot of responsibilities placed on the table of CS Finance, or national, in charge of national treasury. I will get to understand.
All right, all right. I think, to be fair, we'll allow you time to appraise yourself with that. But the other day, when a cabinet secretary and the Attorney General were being sworn in, I think it was 2 days ago.
Yeah, 2 days ago,
yes, we saw you being invited to take a photo with the rest of the National Security Council. Is that so?
Yes.
Why would you sit at the National Security Council?
I'm told there is a provision in law. I need to check that. I also didn't know that I'm in the National Security Council. Sam, to be honest, you saw I was being invited to stand. I thought it is CS Interior and the CS Defense.
Yeah.
And of course the Deputy President, the President. But I'm told there is a provision. I don't know. I don't think it is in the Constitution. Maybe the Constitution talks to any other member. Now, so I'm told there is co-option, so that the National Security Council agreed or decided to co-opt the CS for in charge of...
Are you comfortable with that? Because I'm looking at Article 240 of the Constitution.
Yeah.
There is established a National Security Council, and sub-article 2, the council consists of the President, the Deputy President, Cabinet Secretary for Defense, Cabinet Secretary for Foreign Affairs, Cabinet Secretary for Internal Security, the Attorney General, the Chief of Kenya Defense Forces, Director General of the National Intelligence Service, the IG of the National Police Service, and the Council shall exercise supervisory control over national security organs and perform any other functions prescribed by national legislation. Then says that the Council shall appoint its secretary. Then, in terms of roles, the Council shall integrate the domestic, foreign, and military policies relating to national security in order to enable the national security organs to cooperate and function effectively. I'm just wondering, what role...
So have you looked at the statutes? Because I'm told there's a statute which allows co-option. Again, this is something that I would tell you I also had no idea.
Yeah.
And there is a statute that co-opts, and I think the reasoning was that if you sit in a National Security Council, most of the decisions will require funding, and then you need the person in charge of the finances to sit in that. That is the explanation I was
given.
Because I asked myself, really, I wasn't aware I'm a member of this council. So
that's interesting, because I'm just imagining if the framers of the Constitution intended an extra member to join, they would have said that the NSC may co-opt. It doesn't say that.
But I mean, if the statutes say, and it is still in place,
but the Constitution is supreme.
That is now for the judiciary to interpret whether it contradicts. The Constitution is supreme.
Yep.
In the event you legislate in a manner that would contradict the Constitution, then it is null and void.
Right.
In this case, I don't think anyone has said that that is contradicts the Constitution.
Okay.
If it does, I mean, if the law says I don't sit in the National Security Council, why would I?
So have you attended any meetings so far?
No, not yet.
Have you attended a cabinet meeting so far?
There's no cabinet meeting we have attended.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So how have you been operating?
In terms of what? You don't have to attend. I mean, you have cabinet meetings to... Cabinet meetings are supposed to be for policy consolidation.
Yeah.
So I know there is one coming up soon. You know, we were just sworn in the other day.
2 weeks ago, yeah.
So you also want to allow the CSS to acclimatize and understand their departments, their ministries. So if you called me the following day after my swearing in, what would I discuss in that cabinet?
Okay, all right. Interesting. So let's talk about, because according to the Central Bank of Kenya, as of May 2024, we had a debt of 10.4 trillion shillings. And there has been a big conversation that we have also taken part in about the previous regime of a debt ceiling of 10 trillion, now a debt anchor of 55% of the gross domestic product, or GDP, if you like. What do you think we need to do? Because already it appears we have breached the debt anchor. What do we do, knowing too well that the deficit, even in the current year, has gone up than it was?
You know, there's something that I didn't speak to when you asked me the earlier question on what do we need to do with our budget and revenue. Something that I needed to mention before I come to this question.
Okay.
And it's also tied to this question is we must also improve on our governance. And I spoke to this very eloquently, I guess, during my vetting. And I said clearly that we must look at our procurement system and have an end-to-end procurement system. Today I had an engagement with the head of procurement at the ministry. And what is stopping this process is 560 million. So it is one of my to-do lists. And it is one of my priority to-do items. That we must have a system which would integrate budgeting to procurement, to payments, even to use of goods, so that we eliminate wastage. Because the problem Kenyans have, some is not even paying taxes. Kenyans have paid taxes. We have one of the most progressive and I would call it people who are so interested in the welfare of this country and how we move forward. So what they need is that their taxes, we are patriots, we just need our taxes to be spent properly. And that responsibility rests with the National Treasury in terms of accounting systems, procurement systems, and that is one priority area. But now coming to your question, what we need to do. You know, if you look at our debt composition today, it's about 50-50 in terms of external and domestic debts. Looking at the debt service costs, it is much more heavy on domestic debt. So you have external debts almost 50%, internal debts or domestic debts to the tune of about, again, 50%. But when it comes to debt servicing cost, domestic debt, you pay almost 3 times what you pay for the external debt. So I'm telling you clearly that our domestic debt is very expensive. We cannot sustain debt at the level where we pay 18% as interest on the money that we borrow. And that is not even factoring in some tax rebates or tax reliefs given to infrastructure bonds if you buy them. So my strategy is that, one, we must try to retire expensive debts, because even these domestic debts are crowding out the private sector. So we must try to retire some of these expensive debts, more particularly the short-term debts of treasury bills, which are 90 days, 182, and 1-year treasury bills. They are too expensive for nothing, and they are too short. They have too short a period to repay them or to pay them back. We want to do what we call debt management. That is our intention, debt management, to look at where, if we get money, then part of that money should go in retiring some of the expensive debts. As we enhance or we support processes that will lead to collection of more taxes, to be able, because the only other way to retire taxes is to have more money, your own money to retire them. Retire debts. And also to stop paying more debt, taking more debts going forward. That can only be realized if you do 2 things. 1, you raise more money, or 2, you manage your expenditure. So these are things, they are multifaceted approaches that we are employing at the moment, beginning this financial year. And I hope in the next 3 years, we will come to a point where we will say our debt sustainability is realistic.
Right. But I'm wondering, because you're saying that we have a lot of expensive short-term loans, which would be the treasury bills. According to the Central Bank of Kenya data, it's only 12.71%.
12-15%.
Yeah. Then for treasury bonds, 87.29%.
Yes, that we should have it, the short-term debts to below 5%. And I will tell you, we should also have domestic debts should come down. It should not even be 50%. So we are trying to enhance or increase the concessional loans, concessional loans, and reduce our domestic borrowing.
By concessional, you mean World Bank, IMF? Yes,
we have the multinationals. You can even have, by the way, bilateral, like, Sam, Japanese government give their loans at about 1%. 1.7, 1.5%. So even though it is bilateral, but it is still cheaper. So the concessional loans can be multilateral, they can be bilateral. Multilateral sometimes have a lot of conditionalities which become difficult to live with. Like now we have the case with IMF, etc. So, but again, we cannot run away from them because it sends a wrong signal to the market. If you run away from IMF, you would affect your financial system completely. So what we do is just to manage them and tell them that we are also still sovereign as a nation. We cannot do what would be hurting our citizens. And I'm very clear on that in my engagement with IMF, that we must do things that are good for this country. Yes, we agree with you. We must improve governance. We must enhance or improve or mobilize more revenue. But we have to do it with a human face. We must remember that Kenyans have to eat and they have to live. and we cannot do anything that would destabilize our economy.
You recently had a meeting with the IMF representative in the country.
Yes, I did.
Now that you're there, what are some of those conditionalities that have been put that you think would be attributable to what has been happening in this country, especially the Finance Act 2023 and Finance Bill 2024?
You see, the meeting that I had with the IMF was more like a courtesy call, but we went ahead to discuss even the upcoming meeting, the board meeting of IMF. Mm-hmm. Largely, our agreement now with IMF is on, it is anchored on what we call revenue mobilization. That we need to demonstrate that we are able to sustain our debt service. And of course, you'll understand IMF, it is a bank. Yep. It is a financial institution. It gives you money and expects it back. Yep. So they would want to see if your economy has the resilience, has the capacity to be able to service the debt. But then in the process, they will tell you, we want clear demonstration that you are going to collect more money. And that is why sometimes I think we went to this trajectory of trying to show, give more tax rates, tax measures that clearly were not very popular with Kenyans to demonstrate to IMF that we could collect more money. But I think IMF has also realized that Kenyans have a right. We are in a society which is democratic. You can't just come up with policies that Kenyans don't agree to or agree with. So my discussion with them was very clear that, remember, the finance bill of 2024 is off the table. The 2023 one, they had a concern that the courts had ruled, the Court of Appeal had ruled that act was unconstitutional. So they were like, then so what next? So my answer to that was fine. If it will remain, we have already appealed, which now I think we are in a better position because the Supreme Court has given a stay. Yep. But I said and I mentioned that we are reforming a KRA to collect more money. Okay. And I also mentioned that we already have a Finance Act of 2022. Even if 2023 falls, we can use the Finance Act of 2022 to still continue to collect revenue. And again, we need to enhance revenue collection without really changing the tax rates. And I have spoken to this a number of times, Sam, and I believe it and I mean it. I'm not a con man. I didn't come to the Treasury to continue with business as usual. I'm very clear, even to the appointing authority. I've told him very clearly, my president, you must understand that I've come here to do things differently, and he's in agreement with me. So we are not going to oppress Kenyans with unnecessary taxes just because we have been told to do so. Right. We must reason with IMF. We must know that IMF is also our bank. We must reason with them, much as we would want to still engage with them, because if you discontinue engagement with IMF without any justification, then you send a wrong signal to the market. That we don't want to do. Sure. But the bottom line and the solution to all this is to self-sustain. And I think the objective of the government is, it was 3 years from this financial year, which we may adjust a little bit, to have a balanced budget so that we don't go borrowing money every day. You can't live by borrowing. We have a limit. So that's
how does the situation that affected the country on Finance Bill 2024, how does it affect the status of the agreement with the IMF, and how soon do we know if anything is changing? You know, IMF is an institution that argues and reasons. So if they feel that now what has happened in Kenya is something that we cannot sustain, or it's not acceptable to us, then they would just decline in releasing the other funds, because we see the program we have with them is lasting up to April next year. But we can start another program which may have other objectives and other conditions. It doesn't have to be revenue mobilization. It can be something else. But so far there is no indication that has impaired our relationship with them. How do you know if we are okay with them? I'm not saying I know we are okay, but there are no indications as yet, because we had their representatives, we engaged, we talked. And you see, IMF, the people who are in the boards are from these countries we know, the USA, the UK, the Germany. I have held discussions
in the past few days with most of these embassies. I was with the American ambassador, I was with the UK ambassador. Today I was with the German ambassador in my office. Also, we were also with the Chinese ambassador today. So I met the Chinese ambassador, the German ambassador. They have their concerns, but not to impair our relationship, and they're looking forward to our engagement at the board of IMF. And I think I am confident that they are going to support our cause because they also understand what is happening in Kenya. It is not just in Kenya alone. Problems happen everywhere. These are not even problems. These are challenges. Sam, let me be clear on that. These are challenges. Challenges happen in all jurisdictions, in all nations. So in my engagement with the IMF next month, which when we'll have the board, and I hope this time the meeting will materialize because it was supposed to take place in July. It was pushed because of the issues around, and then later it was planned for August again because there was a new CS coming in. They decided to put it in abeyance up to up to September. So in September, I hope we are going to have that board meeting and continue with our engagement with the IMF.
There's also the problem, and your predecessor while handing over mentioned about the grey listing because of the situation that we are also being accused of money laundering, financing of terrorism with no clear strategy on how to deal with that. What are the efforts to ensuring that we get off the grey list?
It is a very complex topic that we may not exhaust. In fact, it may require some good preparation for me to give the details. But I will tell you, one of the challenges that we are facing as a country is our location. You see, look at what is happening in our neighbors, with some countries bordering us without even mentioning, which don't have formal financial systems. So sometimes we find some of those illicit funds getting into this country. We have our neighbor next door, where terrorism is almost the order of the day, without again mentioning name. So that is putting us in some condition that is not very stable. But we have the global body that deals with this matter, and then we are part of the East and Southern Africa anti-money laundering task force. So we are about 22 countries. And on 30th, actually the meeting is starting from, has actually already started in Mombasa. Kenya is now the chair of the East and Southern Africa anti-money laundering task force. And then we have, we have the meetings going on. We have hosted the 22 countries in Diani. On 29th and actually on 30th, as the chair, I'm going to address that function and chair it. And we are discussing parameters. You know, we are doing self-evaluation. And we were evaluated some time back. Things have improved. In fact, the indicators, it is only that we have not been evaluated again. So we are going to be evaluated soon. And my hope is that we are going to get out of the grey listing. Because it is very important for us as a country. If you are grey listed, then your financial system becomes monitored so closely. And that is not very good for a country because you may end up finding yourself in dark listing. And so we want to avoid all that and get out. And some of the parameters where we failed in the last evaluation, we have improved, and they have brought positive reports. So we will continue because it's about legislative framework. It's about what efforts you use to combat these crimes, and more particularly also the judicial process. Which judicial process we have a problem with because, we have a very progressive constitution. There are certain things that they require which may go against our constitution. So we are trying to discuss that in the framework that they must also understand that we have a legal framework in Kenya which we cannot go against. But a lot of those conditions we are trying to fulfill, and I'm sure in due course we will get out of the grey listing. It's one of the priority items again for the ministry.
Okay, let's walk back a little bit to some of the measures that were introduced by your predecessor before he left office. Because of the withdrawal of the Finance Bill 2024, the austerity measures that are supposed to be taken, including advisors to be reduced by 50%, the financing of the Office of the First Lady was to be scrapped for the Office of the Spouse of the Deputy President and the Spouse of the Prime Cabinet Secretary. How far are we with enforcing some of those measures that were also released by the head of public service to be implemented?
Yeah, I think we gave a budget to the various ministries, departments and state agencies to use. I've not seen any indication that that would be violated. And so it is, I believe that they will make sure that they operate within the budget cuts that were implemented in the supplementary budget 1. If there will be need for another additional budget cuts, which I don't know how much we can go in that route, then it will be captured in supplementary budget 2, but the austerity measures are in place.
On paper, but have we had sackings of the extra advisors at State House, at ministries?
Advisors in the ministries, my understanding is that they have been reduced. If there is anybody who has hired more advisors, that is illegal. Because again, ministers have just come in and we were told very clearly one advisor. So there is nothing like violation around that. It was even emphasized again during our induction. And so the advisors, and the advisors in the ministries usually at the level of the cabinet secretary.
Right.
So I don't expect any other officer in the ministries to have advisors. And the cabinet secretaries have just come in, and they're coming in with the new advisors.
Sure.
So if you're told now for you it is one, it is one. And I'm sure my colleagues have implemented that, it is one.
At State House, Office of the Deputy President?
I may not know how many advisors are at the State House and even the Office of the President, but since the President pronounced himself, I think he must lead by example. And so the advisors at State House may not be competent to say how many they are.
As you tell us what success looks for you in about 100 days, if you want to use that target, what are the efforts are you putting in place to ensure that, because every person, including yourself, has spoken about graft being one of the thieves of resources of public sector, what are the efforts that you look forward to putting in place?
I actually don't want to condition myself to days, because really, what is important is to lay a framework that would stand the test of times. But maybe you can talk of short-term, medium-term, and long-term measures. Some of the short-term measures, in my view, is to make sure that we raise as much revenue as we can without putting extra burden on Kenyans, because that is not a route to take. So that is why you can see my priorities on KRA and working with KRA to improve on revenue collection. If that can be realized in the shortest time possible, I'll see that as one of the major achievements. The other one would be to ensure that we don't abuse some of the provisions or some of the responsibilities given to the Cabinet Secretary, like abuse to Article 223 of our Constitution. I am going to make sure that that is not done under my watch. Something else around that
It's important to just indicate that Article 223 allows government to spend what has not been budgeted for?
Yeah, that is correct. The Kenyans have now talked about Article 223, that the average Kenyan in the street know what it is. So that's why I didn't.
It's good for every other viewer.
But it's important to remind them what it is all about, that the Cabinet Secretary has the power to grant expenditure of some certain sums as requested to meet certain category of expenditures, although with a lacuna in law of lack of clarity. But then that should be taken to Parliament for ratification within 2 months, or National Assembly. So that is something that I've said I'm going to make sure that it is not abused. There is also the issue of giving tax waivers and also what we call tax guarantees by the Treasury to pay. That I've also mentioned clearly that you have to really convince me that the tax waiver is necessary and that the tax guarantee is also necessary. And we may need even to do audit of the previous ones. For me, we need to seal all the loopholes in tax which would cause tax leakages. Something else that I would talk about is about procurement. I've said it. I want to see by the deadline which we have given to ourselves of the beginning of the next fiscal year to have in place end-to-end procurement system. That, to me, is important. I also talked about...
What does that mean?
End-to-end, I actually explained it here, that we should see a procurement system which starts from budgeting to procurement to payment and to usage of goods integrated, so that we don't have this broken system which is prone to abuse. Yeah, that needs to be done, an integrated procurement system.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, much of it is short term, or is it medium term? Because you've spoken
a lot of it's short and medium.
Short and medium term.
Because really we don't have luxury of time. Yeah. When you are operating in an environment somewhere your debt sustainability has become questionable. Yep. There is risk of distress. Then you must move with speed. You must chew the gum and scale the stairs. All right. So that is why we are talking about reforming KRA, talking about procurement. We are also talking about auditing certain areas which are prone to risk, to high risk. One of them being payroll. Our payroll system is doubtful. I mean, our payroll is doubtful whether we are paying ghost workers or not. Two, there is the Ministry of Education capitation. We feel that there is a possibility that we are financing students who don't exist. So these are things that we are talking about and need to be addressed quickly. I'm not saying we are going to do auditing, but we are going to do a review. You know, auditing has challenges. When you talk of auditing, then that job belongs to the Office of the Auditor General. But as a government, you can use your system, you can use your internal audits to review your systems to see where there could be leakages. So these are things that we must do very quickly. We have no luxury of time.
Do we know how many students are being financed under the free primary education?
Yeah, the Ministry of Education has data, but you see, that data is dependent on the feeds or the data that is given direct from schools. And we belong to this. We are all in this country. We hear of these stories where the register is inflated. You remember when NEMIS was resisted, and even that NEMIS doesn't appear to be foolproof. So we must be clear. Are we financing? Remember, there was a case where even some schools didn't exist. Yep. And money was released.
So that's what I'm asking. Yeah. Do you know of a figure?
No, I don't have the figure of how many students we are financing. What I know is that the figures are doubtful.
Figures are doubtful. Yes. Waziri, please stay with us. We'll come back.
I thought we are done, Sam.
We will come back with feedback from Kenyans, what they are saying, and if they have any questions that they are raising.
No worries.
But first, we take a short break. We'll be back with the sports and the feedback for Waziri here. Stay tuned.